on the side, but because we all have our phones, that means there are people sitting there. They're using multiple different translations, and it is an extra step in sermon preparation to be looking at a wide variety of translations. Now, my suggestion on a practical level, by the way, just in passing at that point, is if you preach from NESB, ESV, Christian Standard Bible, the upcoming Legacy Standard Bible. In other words, if you preach from a Bible, a modern Bible that is based upon the modern eclectic text, NA 26 onward, then I would compare the New King James. You don't have to compare dozens of different translations. I would just make sure, take a quick glance at the New King James and see if maybe you're dealing with a text where there is a major textual difference between what you have in the modern eclectic text and what's in the TR. Basically, that's what you'll see when you look at the New King James. And if you use the New King James, do it in reverse. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time, but it is good to make sure that you do some checking there. Now, the problem here is that we live in a day where the textual transmission of the New Testament in particular, there's not that much, there just isn't that much difference in the Old Testament. I think your elders should have a knowledge of what the Greek Septuagint is and how you're going to view it. But the Old Testament isn't generally where this stuff comes from. There's very, very, very few differences between the 1525 Blomberg, which the King James used, and the modern Hebrew text. So it's the New Testament where these issues come up. So you should be aware of where your preaching is coming from and the fact there are going to be people who are exposed to all these other perspectives. And in our day, the transmission of the text of the New Testament is under tremendous attack. And no matter how we try to hide from it, it's not been ever something I've tried to hide from, but a lot of people do. You have to address these issues as a pastor, as one who has a responsibility to refute the gainsayers, to use the King James terminology, refute those who contradict. And so we can't avoid these issues. And if you're in a situation where the eldership has determined that there can be variation amongst the elders on this issue, then you're going to get the trumpet's going to sound a different note, because you're not going to be able to say to the people, well, we believe that God has preserved the word in this way, because now you're going to have multiple ways being presented as the mechanism. And I think, honestly, and we've gone over this over and over and over again, the only really consistent way, from a Reformed perspective, seeing that God is king over all that takes place in time, is not to do the drop kick, we're going to just grab hold of this one over here because it looks good to us, and it came out of the Reformation, at least whatever form we've decided to use did. And therefore, that's just the text. I think if you believe that whatsoever takes place in history does so at the predetermined counsel of God for his own glory and for his own purposes, then you need to look at all of church history. You need to look at what the church used in the 4th century and the 2nd century and the 7th century and the 12th century. And you can't ignore any of those things. And when you do that, I think you will be forced to recognize the necessity of a reasoned, eclectical approach to the issue of the text. And so it is problematic I would highly recommend that amongst the elders there be a unanimity of opinion. Now, if you're in a situation where that unanimity is already non-existent, it's a tough situation. Obviously I can get along with fellow believers that just for whatever reason are absolutely convinced they need to use the King James or the TR, whatever else, up to a point. But once we get into defending the flock against the unbelieving attacks coming from the outside, we need to be on the same page, and you're not going to be on the same page as far as what text you're even defending. So wisdom would be that when choosing elders and things like that, be aware of this, that have thought it through, think it through. There may be people who say, hey, I take a different position, but I'm willing to go along, and I'm not gonna raise a stink about it, and I'm not gonna start having a home Bible study about why the rest of the elders are wrong about this. I mean, sadly, I'm well aware of how many churches have come apart over stuff like that. So if you find yourself as a member in a church where this starts being presented, then the question you have to ask is it being presented as the consistent understanding of the entire elder body? Is the elder body divided on this? Are they willing to give and able to give pastoral direction as to how to handle these things? Are they aware of the fact that, either direction you go, if, for example, you get to the end of an exposition of Mark and you do not preach through verses 9 through 20, no matter what, you're going to have to explain why. You can't just go, and we're done. And everybody with the King James or New King James is going, or even other modern translations that still have the brackets, they're going to be wondering why it's there. And of course, they're going to be wondering, should we really be picking up serpents and drinking poison? And is this really a sign of those who follow me? And this sort of seems a little weird and stuff like that. So you can't just finish verse 8 and then walk off to whatever book you're going to do next. Or you're going through John, the pericope adultery. If you're a member of a church, then you have to determine just, how far can you bend? How many weeks can you, if you're convinced this is not scripture, are you willing to just take it for a while? And because it's going to move on. Because here's the issue. The TR and the NA 27, 28, they teach the same thing. The differences just aren't that great. It's an important issue to address, but it's not a different faith. It's not a different religion. And you would have to really put a tremendous amount of imbalanced emphasis upon the few major differences. And I've already mentioned the pericope adultery, the long writing of Mark. And in this instance, the person had asked that majority text. So if they're majority text, they wouldn't even have the Comma Johannium, 1 John 5:7. If they are, then they've got a real problem. But is the connection that you have built through the loving service of other believers in this place over the decades, is that not enough to give you patience during a relatively short preaching series on a text that you're convinced isn't actually canon scripture, but you're willing to go, well, it's just not going to make that much of a difference. To me, it would seem that would depend upon the application and fervor with which the position is presented. And if the eldership is divided on the issue, my expectation would be that there wouldn't be as much energy invested in promoting a particular perspective, because that would be energy that's dividing the eldership as it is. So my personal counsel would be patience, but I'm well aware of the fact that there are people who turn this into a real crusade, and so I get that.